World War II. Chapter 1. The War Breaks Out. World War II started on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. This invasion was led by Adolf Hitler, who wanted to expand German land. Poland's army tried to fight back, but Germany used a new war method called Blitzkrieg, lightning war, which was fast and powerful. Britain and France warned Germany to stop, but Hitler ignored them. On September 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. This marked the official start of World War II. Many countries were shocked, but Hitler was confident. He believed that Britain and France would not fight for long. Meanwhile, Poland was struggling as German forces continued attacking from the west. At the same time, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. This was because of a secret deal between Germany and the Soviet Union, called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They had agreed to divide Poland between them. This left Poland trapped between two powerful enemies. Within a few weeks, Poland was completely defeated. After taking Poland, Hitler turned his attention to Western Europe. Britain and France had expected Germany to attack next, but for several months there was no major battle. This period was called the Phony War, as both sides prepared for the next move. However, behind the scenes, Germany was planning another invasion. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviet Union attacked Finland in November 1939. This war, called the Winter War, was a tough battle. Finland's small army fought bravely, but the Soviet Union was too strong. After a few months, Finland had to surrender some land to the Soviets. By early 1940, Hitler was ready to strike again. In April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. These countries fell quickly. Then, in May 1940, Germany launched a big attack on Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Hitler's army moved fast, and by June 1940, France had surrendered. Britain was now standing alone against Germany. Many people were scared. Hitler had taken over much of Europe in less than a year. The world watched as Britain prepared to fight alone. In the months that followed, German planes started bombing British cities, beginning the Battle of Britain. The war had only just begun, but it was already changing the world. Millions of people were affected, and many feared what would happen. Next, no one knew that this war would last for 6 long years and become one of the deadliest conflicts in history. Chapter 2. Blitzkrieg Strikes. In April 1940, Germany launched a powerful attack using a new war strategy called Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war. This method used fast-moving tanks, planes, and soldiers to attack quickly and overwhelm the enemy. The goal was to strike hard and win fast. The first targets were Denmark and Norway. Denmark surrendered in just a few hours, and Norway fell within weeks. In May 1940, Germany turned its attention to Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. The Netherlands resisted, but after 4 days of bombing, the country surrendered. Belgium also fell quickly. The German army was stronger, faster, and more organized than expected. France had built a strong defense line called the Maginot Line, but Germany simply went around it, attacking through the Ardennes forest. French and British forces were caught off guard. German tanks moved so fast that they cut off thousands of Allied soldiers. The British army and some French troops were trapped near the port of Dunkirk. With no other option, the British launched a massive rescue mission, using Navy ships and even small fishing boats to evacuate over 300,000 soldiers back to Britain. This became known as the Dunkirk evacuation. On June 10, 1940, Italy joined Germany in the war. Italian forces attacked France from the south while German forces moved toward Paris. Within days, France was surrounded. On June 14, 1940, German troops entered Paris. The French government had no choice but to surrender on June 22nd. France was now under German control. With France defeated, Hitler hoped Britain would surrender next. He believed the British people would not want to fight alone. However, Britain's new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, refused to give up. He gave powerful speeches to inspire his people, saying Britain would fight on the beaches, fight on the streets, and never surrender. Hitler was angry that Britain would not surrender. He planned an invasion of Britain, but first, he had to destroy the British Air Force. In July 1940, Germany started bombing British airfields, beginning the Battle of Britain. This was the first time Germany faced real resistance. The British pilots fought bravely, using new radar technology to detect enemy planes. By October 1940, Germany failed to gain air control over Britain. Hitler had lost his first battle. Instead of invading Britain, he turned his attention to a new target, the Soviet Union. Blitzkrieg had worked in Western Europe, but would it succeed in the East? The war was about to become even bigger. Chapter 3. The Battle of Britain. After conquering France in June 1940, Hitler expected Britain to surrender. But Britain, led by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, refused to give up. Hitler then planned Operation Sea Lion, a full invasion of Britain. But first, he had to destroy the British Royal Air Force, RAF. This led to the Battle of Britain. In July 1940, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, started bombing British ships and airfields. Their goal was to weaken the RAF before the invasion. At first, German planes caused heavy damage, but Britain had radar technology which helped them detect incoming attacks. This gave British pilots an advantage. By August 1940, the Luftwaffe launched a massive air assault on Britain. Hundreds of German bombers attacked RAF bases, trying to destroy British planes on the ground. But the RAF fought back fiercely. The British Spitfire and Hurricane fighter planes were fast and powerful. The battle in the skies was intense. In September 1940, he changed tactics and began bombing London and other cities. This was known as the Blitz. For months, German bombers dropped thousands of bombs, destroying homes, factories, and streets. Thousands of civilians were killed, and many took shelter in underground stations to survive. Despite the destruction, the British people did not break. Churchill encouraged them with powerful speeches, saying, "We shall never surrender." The RAF continued to fight bravely, shooting down many German planes. Britain's anti-aircraft defenses also improved, making it harder for the Luftwaffe to succeed. By October 1940, Hitler realized he could not defeat the RAF. His invasion of Britain had failed. The Luftwaffe had lost many planes and pilots, while Britain's spirit remained strong. Hitler was forced to cancel Operation Sea Lion. This was his first major defeat in the war. The Battle of Britain proved that Germany could be stopped. It was the first time Hitler's forces had failed to conquer a country. Britain had stood alone and survived. This victory gave hope to other nations fighting against Germany. With Britain still standing, Hitler decided to focus on a new target, the Soviet Union. He believed he could win in the East with blitzkrieg tactics. But attacking the Soviet Union would be one of his biggest mistakes. The war was about to take a dangerous turn. Chapter 4. Attack on Pearl Harbor. By 1941, World War II had already spread across Europe and Africa. But on December 7th, 1941, the war took a new turn when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii. This surprise attack shocked the world and brought the United States into the war. For years, Japan had been expanding its empire in Asia and the Pacific. It had invaded China in 1937 and later took control of French Indochina, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The U.S. saw Japan as a threat and placed economic sanctions, cutting off Japan's supply of oil, rubber, and metal. Japan saw this as an act of war. Japan's leaders, including Emperor Hirohito and Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, believed war with the U.S. was unavoidable. Instead of waiting for America to strike first, Japan decided to attack first and weaken the U.S. Navy. The target was Pearl Harbor, where most of America's Pacific Fleet was stationed. On the morning of December 7, 1941, at 7:55 a.m., Japan launched a surprise attack. Over 350 Japanese planes bombed U.S. battleships, airfields, and docks. The attack lasted just 2 hours, but caused massive destruction. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, and over 1,000 were wounded. 8 U.S. battleships were damaged or destroyed, including the USS Arizona, which exploded and sank. The U.S. was caught completely off guard. Many American soldiers were still asleep when the attack began. The radar operators had spotted the incoming planes, but they thought they were American aircraft. By the time they realized the truth, it was too late. The attack had already begun. The next day, on December 8, 1941, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt gave a powerful speech, calling December 7th a date which will live in infamy. The U.S. Congress immediately declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S., officially bringing America into World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor united the American people. Many had wanted to stay out of the war, but after this attack, the entire country was ready to fight. The U.S. quickly began building its military, preparing for a long and difficult war in both Europe and the Pacific. Japan had hoped that destroying the U.S. fleet would force America to surrender, but instead, it had awakened a powerful enemy. The U.S. would now fight back with full force, and the war in the Pacific was just beginning. Chapter 5: War on the Eastern Front. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest military invasion in history, against the Soviet Union. Hitler believed he could defeat the Soviets quickly, but the Eastern Front would become one of the bloodiest and most brutal theaters of World War II. At first, the German Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was successful. The German army advanced rapidly, capturing vast Soviet territories including Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states. The Soviet forces, unprepared for the attack, suffered heavy losses. Within months, German troops were at the gates of Moscow. However, as winter arrived, the Germans were not prepared for the extreme cold and snow. Soviet forces, familiar with the harsh conditions, launched a counteroffensive in December 1941. Using fresh troops and new strategies, they pushed the Germans back, saving Moscow from capture. It was Hitler's first major setback. In 1942, Germany shifted its focus to the south, aiming to capture the oil-rich Caucasus region and the key city of Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad became one of the deadliest battles in history. Soviet soldiers fought fiercely, refusing to surrender. The city was reduced to rubble, But in February 1943, the Soviet Red Army encircled and defeated the German Sixth Army. This was a turning point in the war. After Stalingrad, the Soviets launched a massive counterattack. In July 1943, the Battle of Kursk became the largest tank battle in history. The Germans tried to regain control, but the Soviets, now stronger and better equipped, defeated them decisively. From this moment, the German army was on the defensive. As the Red Army advanced westward, they liberated Nazi-occupied territories and discovered the horrors of the Holocaust. Soviet troops were the first to enter concentration camps, uncovering the mass murder of millions of people. The world was horrified by these crimes. By 1944, the Soviet army had pushed the Germans out of Eastern Europe. The final battle took place in April 1945, when the Red Army reached Berlin. After weeks of intense street fighting, Soviet soldiers captured the German capital. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler committed suicide. A few days later, Germany surrendered. The war on the Eastern Front had been one of the most devastating conflicts in history. Over 20 million Soviet citizens died, but their resistance had played a crucial role in the defeat of Nazi Germany. However, tensions between the Soviet Union and the Western Allies were growing, setting the stage for the Cold War. Chapter 6: D-Day and the Invasion. On June 6, 1944, the Allied forces launched D-Day, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Their goal was to liberate Western Europe from Nazi Germany. The operation was called Operation Overlord, and it marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's rule. For months, the Allies planned the invasion carefully. They chose Normandy, France, as the landing site. The Germans expected an attack but believed it would happen at Pas de Calais, the shortest route, from Britain. To confuse them, the Allies used fake radio messages and dummy tanks. Before the landings, thousands of paratroopers were dropped behind enemy lines to destroy bridges, roads, and communication lines. Then, at dawn, over 5,000 ships carried 156,000 troops across the English Channel. The attack was divided into 5 beaches: Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juno, and Sword. At Omaha Beach, American soldiers faced the heaviest resistance. German machine guns fired from high cliffs, cutting down waves of soldiers. Many drowned before reaching the shore. Despite the heavy losses, the troops fought bravely, pushing forward under constant fire. At the other beaches, British and Canadian forces also met strong resistance, but managed to break through German defenses. By the end of the day, the Allies had secured all 5 beaches. Though they suffered over 10,000 casualties, the invasion was a success. After D-Day, the Allies moved deeper into France. By August 1944, they had liberated Paris. The Germans were now retreating, fighting desperately to hold their positions. Meanwhile, Soviet forces were advancing from the east, trapping Hitler's army between 2 powerful enemies. D-Day was a turning point in World War II. It marked the beginning of Germany's downfall. Within a year, the war in Europe would be over. Hitler's once powerful empire was collapsing, and the Allies were closing in for the final victory. Chapter 7: The Pacific War rages. While the war in Europe was reaching its climax, the conflict in the Pacific was far from over. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Japan had rapidly expanded its empire, capturing the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaya, and many Pacific islands. The United States and its allies now had to fight a brutal war across vast ocean distances. The turning point came in June 1942 at the Battle of Midway. The U.S. Navy, using intelligence to crack Japanese codes, launched a surprise attack, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers. This victory crippled Japan's naval power and allowed the Allies to take the offensive. Using a strategy called island hopping, the U.S. began capturing key islands to move closer to Japan. In 1943, they fought fiercely at Guadalcanal, where jungle warfare and disease made battles even more deadly. Each island was heavily defended, and Japanese soldiers often fought to the death rather than surrender. One of the bloodiest battles was Iwo Jima in February 1945. American Marines landed on the volcanic island, facing thousands of hidden bunkers and tunnels. The battle lasted over a month, with nearly 7,000 U.S. troops killed and over 20,000 Japanese soldiers dead. The iconic image of Marines raising the U.S. flag on Mount Suribachi became a symbol of bravery. Next came Okinawa, the largest battle of the Pacific War. In April 1945, over 180,000 American troops landed, facing kamikaze attacks, Japanese pilots crashing their planes into U.S. ships. The battle lasted nearly 3 months, killing more than 200,000 people, including many civilians. It was clear that invading Japan would cost millions of lives. As the Allies prepared for an invasion, the U.S. developed a new, devastating weapon: the atomic bomb. The war in the Pacific was nearing its final, most deadly stage. Chapter 8: The Holocaust and Genocide. As World War II raged across Europe, one of the darkest chapters in human history was unfolding: the Holocaust. Nazi Germany, under Adolf Hitler, carried out a systematic genocide, targeting Jews, Poles, Romani people, disabled individuals, and others they considered undesirable. By the end of the war, over 6 million Jews and millions of others had been murdered. The Nazis began their persecution with anti-Jewish laws, stripping Jewish people of their rights. Businesses were closed, and families were forced to wear yellow stars. In 1938, Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, saw Jewish homes, synagogues, and shops destroyed. Many were arrested and sent to concentration camps. With the invasion of Poland in 1939, the Nazis created ghettos, forcing Jews into overcrowded, disease-ridden areas. Food was scarce, and thousands died from starvation. In 1941, after Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the Nazis began mass shootings, with special killing squads, known as Einsatzgruppen, executing entire communities. By 1942, the Nazis implemented the final solution, a plan to exterminate all Jews in Europe. Death camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor were built, where victims were sent to gas chambers upon arrival. Others were subjected to forced labor, medical experiments, and starvation. Despite the danger, some Jewish resistance groups fought back. In 1943, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising saw armed Jews resisting Nazi forces for nearly a month before being crushed. Others, like Oskar Schindler and Raoul Wallenberg, risked their lives to save thousands of Jews. As the war neared its end, Soviet and Allied forces liberated the concentration camps, revealing the horrors inside. Survivors, weak and starving, told the world about the unimaginable cruelty they had endured. The Holocaust became a symbol of human suffering and the dangers of hatred. After the war, the world sought justice. In 1945-46, the Nuremberg trials were held, where Nazi leaders were convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Holocaust remains a painful reminder of the importance of fighting against discrimination, racism, and genocide. Chapter 9: The atomic bomb strikes. By mid-1945, World War II in Europe had ended, but the war in the Pacific continued. Japan refused to surrender, and the Allies feared that an invasion of Japan would result in millions of deaths. To end the war quickly, the United States made a controversial decision to use the atomic bomb. During the war, American scientists under the Manhattan Project had developed a powerful new weapon, the atomic bomb. After successfully testing it in July 1945, President Harry S. Truman warned Japan to surrender or face complete destruction. When Japan refused, the U.S. prepared to drop the bomb. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb, Little Boy, was dropped on the city of Hiroshima. In seconds, a massive explosion destroyed most of the city. Over 80,000 people died instantly, and thousands more suffered from severe burns and radiation poisoning. Japan still did not surrender. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, the U.S. dropped a second bomb, Fat Man, on Nagasaki. Another 40,000 people were killed instantly, with thousands more dying in the following weeks. The destruction was overwhelming. On August 15, 1945, Japan finally surrendered. The war was over, and the world had witnessed the deadliest weapon ever used in warfare. On September 2, 1945, Japan signed the official surrender aboard the USS Missouri, ending World War II. The use of atomic bombs remains one of the most debated events in history. Some argue it saved millions of lives by ending the war quickly, while others believe it was unnecessary and caused unimaginable suffering. It also marked the beginning of the nuclear age, where the world would live under the threat of atomic war for decades. In the aftermath, Japan was occupied by Allied forces, and under U.S. guidance, it rebuilt into a peaceful and modern nation. However, the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, known as hibakusha, continued to suffer from radiation effects for the rest of their lives. The bombings changed history forever and served as a warning of the dangers of nuclear weapons. Chapter 10. The war finally ends. By August 1945, the world had endured 6 years of devastating war. Millions had died, cities lay in ruins, and entire nations had been shattered. With Germany defeated in May, only Japan remained. After the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan finally agreed to surrender. The long and brutal war was coming to an end. On August 15, 1945, Japan's Emperor Hirohito addressed the nation for the first time. In a radio broadcast, he announced Japan's unconditional surrender. The world rejoiced. This day became known as VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day. Celebrations erupted across the United States, Britain, and allied nations. People danced in the streets, and soldiers hugged strangers, relieved that the war was finally over. On September 2, 1945, the official surrender ceremony took place aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Japanese officials signed the documents in front of Allied leaders, including General Douglas MacArthur. The war was officially over, and the world entered a new era of rebuilding and recovery. The cost of World War II was staggering. Over 70 million people had died, including soldiers and civilians. Entire cities like Berlin, London, Tokyo, and Warsaw had been reduced to rubble. Millions were left homeless, and the world faced the challenge of rebuilding broken societies. The United Nations, UN, was soon created to prevent future global conflicts and promote peace. In Europe, Germany was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. This division later led to tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, marking the beginning of the Cold War. In Japan, U.S. forces occupied the country, helping it rebuild and establish a new democratic government. Despite the war's end, memories of the Holocaust, the atomic bombings, and the millions of lost lives haunted the world. War trials were held to punish Nazi and Japanese war criminals. The Nuremberg trials and Tokyo trials sought justice for the horrific crimes committed during the war. World War II had changed history forever. It reshaped borders, economies, and political powers. The world had learned a painful lesson, but conflicts would continue in the years ahead. The hope was that humanity would never again face such destruction.